is you're just painting a picture of a changing landscape. But really what you want to do is paint a picture of the future and then evolve towards that future in a controlled manner. And that was a recent project I was on, was about.
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process. Welcome to the next episode of Process Pioneers. My name is Daniel Rayner. I'm the host of Process Pioneers. And in each of these episodes, I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with process experts, process practitioners, those that are living and breathing business process management day in and day out in their organizations. And, you know, we're into the hundreds of episodes now. And if this is your first time to the series, welcome. There's plenty of content for you to consume that we've discussed in the past. And it's evergreen content as well. You know, process is such a key part of the organizations that we're in, whether you know it or not, whether you realize it or not. Process touches every person in an organization, from your senior leadership down to your frontline operational employees. So plenty of process experts for you to glean from. And in today's episode is very exciting. We're sitting down with Pete McFarlane again. Now, Pete's been in the series before a while back now. I believe Pete goes into talking about the magic bullet for BPM, I believe was the name that we gave that episode. So by all means, go back and watch that one. But it's so good to have you back on the show again, Pete. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Excited to have more of a chat about process. My favourite subject.
That's fantastic. And in today's session, what I'd love to really dive into is a topic and a question that I think a lot of people are asking these days is, how does process and transformation, how do they work together? How are they complementary? You know, there's many organizations doing transformations, but where does process fit into the whole picture? Some organizations are very familiar with a process-centric approach, and other organizations, it couldn't be more unfamiliar with that sort of technique and that approach. But let's start there. Where does process and transformation fit into one another?
Yeah, thanks for that. For me, I tend to work with organisations that are less mature in terms of process. So what we find is there's often somebody's obtained the budget to do some transformation through some good work business cases and whatever. And there's various reasons why an organisation might want to transform. There's all of the good proactive stuff, like we've identified an opportunity to get a whole lot better, but we have to change the way we go about it. Right through to there's a change in the marketplace, and suddenly we have to catch up really quickly. But I'm finding in the space that I work more often, it comes down to things like where technology has had a massive underinvestment. And there's a lot of catch-up that needs to be done, and it's constraining the way that we might want to move ahead with our process. Often those processes aren't documented either, by the way, so you need to go back a few steps before you can go forward. And so where that gets us to is a really technology-led approach to transformation, and often people and processes get left behind. And that's a big mistake, I believe. I think you need the golden triangle, they call it, people, process, and technology. You need all three walking in step to make something sensible out the other end. And there's no point having the best technology in the world if you've got nobody to operate it and no process to tell it what to do. So we've really got to be quite deliberate about how we go about these things. And so that's the main sort of things that have been occupying my mind over the last while.
Yeah, great. And it's something that I certainly have heard before, organizations diving at technology, throwing technology at problems and hoping that it will be the solution without factoring in the whole people side. Like our organizations, they're made up of people and many people, and also the process side as well. Why do you think there is or has been such an emphasis or push on technology and in a lot of cases neglecting the people and the process? Why do you think organizations end up here?
I think a lot of organisations, especially the ones that are less mature in terms of process, are jumping towards final state rather than doing the work and bringing the whole organisation through to that end point together. And it really does leave everybody behind high and dry. You find things like a typical operating model. And to me, an operating model is really, it's like a matrix of your processes versus your roles in your organisation. But I've found recently, my experience has been that they're really just an org chart. And that doesn't actually serve the end purpose, because why we have that is it really helps us define the kind of technology solutions that we need to support those roles and support those processes. And without that, we end up getting the wrong technology tools, or we end up getting them misaligned and unable to cope with the complexities that we need it to do. And sometimes you find that technology gets put in with no constraints on the use of it. And so that just leaves the users to try and work out how to make it work. And, it's like being given Word and told, here's a database to run your organisation. Sure, it could be, but it's probably not. It takes a lot of manual stuff to turn that into something that means something to customers, because at the end of the day, that's what you're there for. It's for the customers.
Yeah, that's right. And oftentimes I feel like it's quite a Band-Aid fix in a sense. Like it might be solving a very specific or a very niche problem in the organization, but we all know how many systems and applications are all throughout our organizations, like hundreds, in some cases thousands of technology, thousands of software and systems and applications that we're using, or we've kind of slapped into place. But how are we delivering value from an end-to-end perspective? And you nailed it on the head right there with, it's all about the customer. How are we delivering that value? We might make things incredibly efficient and effective in one tiny area of the business, one niche area of the business, because we put the latest and greatest fancy new tech in place. But if we're not understanding the upstream or the downstream impact, like what's actually happening outside of the confines of that technology, it's only going to cause more harm than good.
Yeah, exactly right. And your process relates back to your strategy. And so you need that longer term view of what's going to happen and how you want to approach that. Then that can help define your process. And from your process, that helps you determine what kind of skill set you need in your people, and then what kind of technology you need to turn that skill set and process into a deliverable for your customer. And that's the golden arches, isn't it, of what we're there for. Sorry, McDonald's. I'm just borrowing your thing for a little bit.
Yeah. And I think with organizations, especially larger ones, there's such a high turnover of people. The number of times I've been speaking with an organization and I've been talking to them about the different technology that they're using, the number of times they've said, that person's not around anymore, as in the person that introduced that technology or the person that owned that technology, they're not around anymore. They moved on. They moved on quite a while ago, and actually no one's owning that technology at the moment. It's actually not being used because no one's really owning it and championing it. And that leads to, I would say that there's many organizations out there don't actually know how much technology they've got, how much technology they're paying for. I had a conversation with a university not too long ago, and I think they had just done their audited, their entire university from a technology point of view. What are they using? And they were blown away. They were surprised. They were like, we thought we knew how much technology we were using. It was probably 3 times, 4 times, 5 times the amount of applications that we actually weren't even aware we were paying for and had in here. So, and at the end of the day, if that technology is not supporting a process or part of a process, then what's it doing?
Exactly. Yeah, I can give an example of a well-known public sector agency, which I won't name, where we went and did pretty much that. Actually, we're looking at how we assess software to allow it into the network or not. And Adobe Acrobat had 9 different versions on the network, and they're all being paid for. And I think, it's actually quite expensive, some of the licensing that was there. If we had updated everybody to the modern, it'd be much cheaper. And we found out that half the people had left and we're still paying licenses for them anyway. There's all those kinds of things. And I think organizations are very good at the onboarding part because that gets people up and productive. But when people leave, they forget about the offboarding because nobody's going to complain. If they're not there to complain, then you're not going to do anything about it, are you? So we keep on paying licensing fees and so on without ever really managing it that well. So there's all of those kinds of things, and they always becomes a technology burden as well because it makes it harder to upgrade when you've got all these different versions of things floating around on your network, and particularly the use of all-in-one suites. So you find that there's an all-in-one suite, the obvious one is Microsoft Office 365, but then there's other suites that somebody's got as for a particular function in that suite that was really useful for that time, but it's got all these other things that don't get locked off or whatever. So people start using them out of preference. And suddenly you've got this mass of technology with a mass of options that actually ends up constraining everybody because we've mixed and matched stuff rather than actually gone deliberately about only having particular tools for particular jobs.
Yeah, definitely. And I think in some cases, and especially in the government space, and very large departments, you've got such sort of old legacy systems that have been in place for decades and have, it's kind of they're cemented into the organization. Like they're not things that you can quick and easily like rip and replace and upgrade. But I think, they've just been operating that in that way for so long and with such a high volume of people. I bet a lot of them wouldn't have any idea of how inefficient or that there's even a possibility of improving on what they do because they've done it for so long. If you don't have a culture of continuous improvement and looking for ways to change and improve and optimize what you're doing, then you're just going to continue doing the same old thing, what you've always done, without moving up, I guess, improving the value that you're delivering for your consumers, your customers, or for your internal people as well. Like everyone wants to turn up to work every day and do work that they're proud of and that they feel like they're contributing value to an organization. And if we're forcing our people to do old and outdated processes and tasks and jobs, then they're going to look elsewhere. They're going to look at organizations that have better processes and free people up to do more value adding to activities and things like that.
Yeah, or we just get out-competed because our processes are slow and old and clunky. Our opposition has just started up and they've got brand new software that does things really well. We can't compete anymore. We have to end up dropping price to keep market share. And that's not a very good formula for success. But, yes, one of the things that I'm thinking about with that too is knowledge management. I'm thinking that really our process architecture and all our documented processes, that is knowledge.
Yes.
That with business rules. We might link it with the risks that we manage, might list it with our KPIs, all sorts of other aspects, policies, and so forth. That is our knowledge management. You don't need a specific knowledge management system if you've got all those other things in place. And, you do need things like an EDRMS or whatever as well, absolutely. But you don't need, if you've got that, you've got the guts of your knowledge management. If somebody can walk into the job and be shown, here's the procedure for doing X, Y, and Z, here's the one for doing this other thing, then you're good to go. You're probably looking over the shoulder for half a day. But if you don't do that, you're going to have somebody having to tell them for the next 2 weeks, and then 2 months later, they're still coming back for reminders. And that is on the assumption that the person telling them actually knows what they're doing as well, which is sometimes not an assumption that is a good one.
Yeah, totally. And then there's plenty of cases where people leave an organization with so much corporate knowledge in their head, and sometimes it's very swift. It's people can leave with very short notice. And sometimes you don't get the opportunity to capture all of that knowledge and what they were doing. So you are kind of back to square one again, being like, well, we've got to design this from the ground up. Oh boy, it would have been great to have all of that knowledge that Jim just left us with. He was here for 30 years. He was here for 40 years. It would have been good if we could capture and retain that, because that's a whole lot of value that's just walked out of the building. But how do you think organizations need to I guess there are people that are going to be listening to this conversation that they'll resonate with what you're saying, that, we've got all technology's been thrown at everything left, right, and center. How do these people go about, I guess, changing that mindset, changing that culture to one that has more it also focuses and emphasizes the people and the process?
So one thing that I've been doing is looking at that golden triangle, the people, processes, technology, and you can ask the questions. Okay, so we've got the people here. Obviously, that we've got org design experts in there helping us design up the structure. We've got technology, and they've got a great service strategy plan for how they're going to implement a whole lot of new systems. What's happening with process? And often the answer is not a lot, because we used to do it reactively. When we get a problem, it's suddenly time to look at the process. But we can front foot that stuff and make sure that actually it contributes to the way the org design gets done and the way that the strategy for the IT systems gets put in place, so that we have a coherent set of things moving forward. It's often execs are juggling a whole lot of things. They've got a whole lot of people in their ear. So you've got to be really short, sharp, and punchy with it. Careful with the punchy, though. You don't really want to do that. But you've got to be able to explain it really quickly. And I think something like the golden triangle, people, process, technology, it's something that everybody's heard about. It's been around for, I don't know, it must be close to 50 years now. So it's not an unfamiliar thing. They'll know what you're talking about straight away. And they'll be able to identify that, people, we've got that sorted. We've got plenty of people talking to me about that. We've got plenty of people talking to me about technology, but nobody's talking about process. What are we going to do to do that? And then that's you with your pre-prepared answer going, have I got a plan for you? Yes. And then you can step up and fill some of that space with some of your ideas about the process architecture and actually managing processes proactively, rather than reacting when we're on the front page of the paper for a failure again.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I think, again, you nailed it before when you were saying that process is really the link or the tie into the strategic objectives of the organization. Technology is everywhere throughout our organization, and it's in pockets, and it's being used by different teams, and half the people wouldn't know what other technology is out there. They're just focused on the technology that they interact with and they use on a daily basis. But how are we taking the strategic objectives of the organization, and how are we enabling and empowering our workforce, which in some cases it's hundreds, in some cases it's thousands, in some cases it's tens of thousands of people, that all should be working together in the same direction, all working together to bring value and drive the organization to those strategic goals and objectives. And if that's not happening, then people are pulling in different directions. Some voices are going to be louder than others, as you were saying before. Some people are going to squeak. They're going to be squeaky. They're going to get the attention, and I guess that's where the reactivity sort of comes from, as opposed to being proactive and having a clear understanding of, well, why do we do what we do? How do we do what we do? And what's the structure there? And everybody in an organization, they interact with the process on a different level. Your senior leader, they're going to be more interested in that bird's eye view, that cross-departmental view, that cross-functional view of an organization. That's what they care about. But for a lot of people, they're going to be involved in a particular department and involved in the nitty-gritty detail of a particular area of a particular department.
Yeah, yeah. And so it's also about how we approach our processes as well, because typically from the BA discipline, project managers and other IT stakeholders want us to document the process of using a system. But that is not helpful at all to the customer or to the person who's supposed to be doing the process. What they really want to know is how they take a process from the start right through to the end. And we need to know where that jumps the fence between different business units or even different actors within the same business unit, because that's where we get our chance to actually collaborate and produce something that's useful. That's Roger Tregear's process mindset, really. I think of it as process culture, because I think it's really what it actually is about the culture of the organisation. And if we are working together, then a lot of those problems seem to disappear. Because we start to iron them out ourselves, rather than needing a formal project to come along and cast blame in different parts and punish people and all those other kinds of negative things. What we're actually just working together for the best interests of the customer, and it's just life is so much more satisfying doing that than wondering if the finger's going to point at you.
Totally. It must be a good feeling getting to an organisation and I guess meeting or knowing that they've got internal process champions already that already understand this concept and value understanding and managing and improving processes, because in a lot of cases it's quite rare.
Yeah, I've yet to have that experience. That's not quite true. I have been one place that does, but it's quite rare, I find. And usually, I find the levels of maturity that we're at, a lot of people are doing the throwaway models. So it might be for a particular project. We've got a requirements project, so the process of using CRM. So we'll do that, and that's okay. It's not going to be used beyond there. It's just going to sit on a shelf or quietly wither away on a network drive or something. But that thinking is embedded in the systems for later on if somebody did want to come back and start to do that properly.
Yeah. Now it's got to be living and breathing. Like it's artifact. The artifacts they're alive. They should be maintained and they should be updated and they should be current. I mean, the number of process mapping exercises that have been conducted and they end up with a entire repository on SharePoint with it's Visio maps or whatever it might be, and it's just not. Yeah, and it's just not getting used and not maintained, and you kind of ask the question, well, why do we do all of that work in the end? And I think that's why it gets a bit of a bad rap sometimes, is because the senior leaders are like, oh, what did it actually do for us in the end? But I know that it's quite great when you have the senior leaders that buy into the idea, and there are a few of them floating around, and they'll move to an organization, and we've seen it happen quite a bit in the telco space. And when you get the CEO that walks through the door, and every time a problem's presented to them, they're like, well, show me the process first. I can't solve this problem effectively without understanding what the process is and who's involved and what the baseline looks like. What does the current state look like? And so that's really refreshing when you do come across that. But what would you say the future of business process management looks like? Where do you think organizations need to focus their attention in the next 2-3 years?
I think it's pretty much the same battles we've been fighting since forever, to get space at the table, at the top table, to get process taken seriously and stuff done about. And that speaks to credibility a lot too. And so I think, as you were just talking about, with lots of documents sitting on shelves or withering away on network drives, it's actually making that stuff current. And we can get stuck in the as-is debate too much. And I try to resist that as much as I can. But you inevitably, as soon as you start doing an as-is, somebody's got an exception. Oh, but it doesn't quite work that way sometimes, and we've got to do a bit more over here. And you end up modelling as-is forever. And
right.
As you're just painting a picture of a changing landscape. But really what you want to do is paint a picture of the future and then evolve towards that future in a controlled manner. And that was a recent project that I was on, was about merging organisations. And that was the thing that was really being struggled with in that transformation, was how we actually get to that future state. But my question was, well, we don't actually have a future state. What if we actually just drew exactly how we wanted it to work? And then we don't need to focus so much on what things currently are. Just how do we get towards that future state, and where do we merge along the line? Where do we start to combine our CRMs and our various other systems together? And you can actually set out a plan that involves process and technology and people, all and little mini projects along the way, rather than a big bang, right, we're flicking the switch today, I hope it works. Because usually the answer is it doesn't. Or often, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, Peter, I just want to thank you for sitting down with me again. It's been very enjoyable, and I've certainly been gleaning a lot from your experiences, and I know the audience has as well. It's always fascinating being able to sit down with someone that has been in the trenches and has been involved in implementing business process management and bringing people along that journey, from many different levels of the organization. So, I just want to thank you for sitting down with me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me.